Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you for being here at the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory. And I know a few of you have heard me say this before, but man, I've got the best job in the world. For those of you that don't know me, I am the Library and Observatory Director as well as the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival Director. So, thank you, Jamie. We are delighted to have you here for another exciting installment of the Writers Festival Writer Series, where we celebrate storytelling, history, and the literary voices that shape our culture. The Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory is proud to be a place where ideas come to life, where authors and readers connect, and where stories inspire us to see the world in a new and meaningful way. Oh, and we love giving out free books. Before we get started, I will ask that you all please silence your cell phones. So this year, empowering young voices is at the heart of what we do. And this year, we're proud to introduce a new, make sure that phone's off. We're proud to introduce a brand new initiative that celebrates the power of young writers. The Rancho Mirage Writers Festival, in partnership with the Western Wind Foundation, co-sponsored the inaugural Western Wind Writing Contest. This contest provided 7th grade students from 5 Palm Springs Unified School Districts, middle schools, with a platform to express their thoughts, emotions, and creativity through essays on a theme of overcoming adversity, whether it was through fiction or nonfiction. Out of over 300 submissions, 20 exceptional young writers were selected as the winners. These students demonstrated incredible talent, resilience, that's phone number 2, and storytelling ability. I am going to take one more moment. Please silence those phones. Today, we are thrilled to welcome one of those remarkable young voices, Camila Vasquez from Cielo Vista Charter Middle School. Would you please join me in welcoming Camila to the stage to read her essay?
Thank you. My name is Camila Vasquez, and my story is called Ara. Julie, slow down, Ara yelled. She didn't listen. Julie went faster on her bike, trying to hit the speed bumps. Come on, just do it, she yelled, while having her hands off of her bike. Okay, but promise to catch me if I fall, Ara yelled. I promise, just do it. Okay. Ara rode her bike as fast as she could towards the ice cream shop. Ara and Julie spent the time of their lives riding their bikes towards the ice cream shop. At the ice cream shop, they talked about what they wanted to do for their future. I want to be a doctor, Ara said. I want to be a food tester, Julie said jokingly. That's not a thing, Ara said. Yeah, it is, Julie protested. No, it's not, Ara annoyingly said. They went on about this for a very long time until they had to go home. On the way home, they talked about things they loved and the drama happening at their school. When they entered the home, they were greeted by their mother and the amazing smell of pasta. Their dad entered the room, tired from work with dark circles under his eyes. Until the family was all together, they sat down at the dinner table, waiting to eat the delicious food. The family talked about news, grades, and work until it was time to go to bed. Ara had time opening her plastic water bottles, which was a problem as she was always thirsty at night and scared of the dark. So she always brought a water bottle with her. Each night she brought her water bottle, Julie had to open them each night. Hey, Julie, can you open my water bottle, please? Ara asked as she entered Julie's room. Yeah, all right, Julie mumbled as she opened the bottle. Hey, do you think I can borrow your necklace again for school tomorrow, please? Ara asked, but she knew that Julie would say no. Yeah, it's all right, and if you want, you can keep it, Julie said, handing Ara the necklace with a sad smile on her face. Really? Ara said with a happy smile. Yeah, as long as you remember that I love you. Julie said, tears in her eyes, I know that. But why are you so sad? Ara said, tilting her head. Well, when the time comes, I know that you might not feel like I love you, but I do. Julie said, I love you too. Julie went in for a hug, her breath shaking as she held her sister in her arms. As they parted ways, Julie looked as though she was crying, but Ara thought that her brain was messing with her. As Ara woke up to go to the restroom to get ready for school, she saw her sister on the floor. Ara froze at the sight of her sister on the floor with a pill container next to her hand. Her face drained of emotion. At the sight of her, she started to scream for her parents and cried. Her parents arrived at the sight of a younger sister telling her now late older sister to wake up. The younger sister shaking her sister's body. The mom let out a cry while rushing over to Julie, holding her face in her hands as she cried for her daughter. The father went to the phone to call the hospital, but he started to break down on the phone. The ambulance took away her sister's body away. It took 2 men to hold the mom back from taking Julie from her. Ara had so many memories go through her head as they took her away, from bike riding and swimming to last night. Ara felt as though it was her fault. Maybe if she had noticed, maybe if she could have stopped her, she could have seen her sister graduate or have a family. If only she had noticed. Her mother was crying beside her on her bed while Ara just remained frozen. The family for the past weeks had gotten sorries and condolences, but nothing could fix her pain. She decided to begin therapy. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Hunt. She was a slender, red-headed, blue-eyed lady who was very welcoming. Their first meetings were only Dr. Hunt talking. As time passed, Ara gave Dr. Hunt a try and started to communicate with her. In those therapy sessions, Ara poured out her heart, expressing the guilt, grief, and confusion that had consumed her every moment. Dr. Hunt listened patiently, offering gentle advice and reassurance. Through their conversations, Ara began to unravel the complex emotions surrounding her sister's passing. As weeks turned into months, Ara gradually found solace in therapy. She learned to cope with her loss, understanding that she couldn't change the past, but could change her future. With Dr. Hunt's support, Ara embarked on a journey of self-discovery and rediscovering her sense of purpose and resilience. Despite the lingering pain, Ara had started to find moments of peace. She cherished memories with her sister, holding on to the laughter they shared and the bond they forged. Through therapy, Ara realized that her sister's love would always be a part of her, guiding her through life's challenge. As Ara continued her therapy lessons, she found herself opening up about her dreams and aspirations. With Dr. Hunt's encouragement, Ara pursued her passion for medicine, honoring her sister's memory by striving to make a difference in the world. In time, Ara emerged from the depths of despair, embracing life with renewed strength and determination. Though the ache of the lost remained, Ara carried her sister's spirit with her, finding comfort in knowledge that their bond transcends space and time. As Ara reflected further, she realized that therapy had been her lifeline, guiding her through the darkest of times and illuminating the path towards healing. With gratitude in her heart, Ara looked at the future with hope, knowing that her sister would always be by her side, watching her with love and pride. Thank you.
Wow. All right. Camila, your words and perspective matter. We are all honored to recognize your achievement. Can we please give Camila a well-deserved another round of applause? So that's just part of what the Writers Festival is doing to our community, or for our community. This is another example of the Writers Series, and a multitude of different other things, but this all would not be possible without our founder, Jamie Kabler, and his vision. For the Writers Series and the 200 books and 10 different speakers throughout this year, we owe our gratitude to Jordan Snitzer for being the sponsor of the Writers Series. So please give a round of applause. Three individuals in this room, amazing individuals as who they are, but also collectively our city council members. We have Mayor Pro Tem Lynn Mulatto. I'm sorry. Our Mayor Ted Weil. And our council member Steve Downs. They help lead an amazing organization, including our library staff and our Writers Festival staff. So thank you to our staff for all that you do. So one of the more exciting developments that this year is the introduction that we live stream the 2025 Rancho Mirage Writers Festival free of charge to the community. With minimal marketing and minimal notice, we had over 21,000 viewers over the 2.5 days. This helped bring world-class literary discussions into homes across the country. If you've missed that live stream or the festival itself, you're still in luck. With amazing support of the Allen Foundation, each and every one of those sessions was recorded and is now available on the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival YouTube page. So please go there and take a look at all of our videos. Building on that success, I'm thrilled to announce that the 2026 Rancho Mirage Writers Festival will also be live streamed free of charge. This initiative allows even more people to experience the magic of the festival, no matter where they are. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for our Writers Festival e-blast newsletter so you can stay up to date on next year's lineup, including our author announcements. And I will tell you today, and I can't announce all the authors that came or are being under contract, but within the last hour and a half of people coming in, Jamie, Debbie, and myself got news of about 6 or 7 really big names, and we're very excited to share those as soon as I can get back to my desk and get those contracts signed. We're pleased to continue to bring some of the most compelling voices in literature. Upcoming in the Writer Series, next week we have Maureen Dowd, portraits. Speaking on her book, Portraits of Star from Hollywood, Culture, Fashion, and Tech. Followed by, in the upcoming weeks, Kim Hestrater and Edward O'Keefe. So please keep an eye on those. Each of these events promises to be a thought-provoking conversation and unforgettable insights, so we hope to see you here. Now on to today's special guest, Adam Nimoy, the author of The Most Human, Reconciling With My Father, Leonard Nimoy. This deeply personal and heartfelt memoir explores Adam's journey to understand and reconnect with his legendary father, best known for his portrayal as Spock on Star Trek. Joining Adam in conversation today is Justice Doug Miller, who will guide us through an engaging discussion about legacy, family, and the universal quest for understanding our loved ones. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Adam Nimoy and Justice Doug Miller.
Good job. So good afternoon and welcome. I was going to say welcome to the desert, but maybe we're in Seattle.
I just came from Seattle. The weather's quite similar.
So I think I have to say right at the beginning that I assumed what this book was going to be about, and it turned out different. I thought we would come here and Scotty would beam us up to the Starship Enterprise and we'd have an adventure with Captain Kirk and Spock. But in reality, this was something almost much better, because it's a very personal, it's a very candid journey of you, your family, and your father. And I loved it. You're a great writer and an excellent storyteller, and you should have been a trial lawyer, because that's what trial lawyers do.
Thank you, Doug. Well, I was a lawyer, but the courtroom was never appealed to me. I was purely transactional, but then that only lasted 7 years. It was something I just was not fitted to do and wanted to do something more creative.
So I'm just going to start right at the beginning. Why this book? Why did you feel compelled to write this book?
Well, Doug, that's a big question. The fact of the matter is that, I've been in recovery for 21 years now, and I had been sharing on and off during that period the story of my relationship with my dad. My dad and I had a very tumultuous relationship. It was a weird combination of having extraordinary experiences being the son of Leonard Nimoy because of his tremendous success, coupled with periodic episodes of flat-out conflict, verbal warfare between my dad and I, which was exacerbated by the fact that I was a 30-year pothead and my dad was an admitted alcoholic. And I didn't know how to reconcile or deal with him. We didn't know how to deal with each other. We came from very different generations, different planets, I like to say. And it was only through 12-step recovery and the tools of recovery that I figured out a way to reconnect with my dad and to make an amends to him and to have a strong and loving relationship the last years of his life. And I had to overcome a lot to get to that point. And when I share this story at AA meetings, and Al-Anon, I'm a double winner. Al-Anon is for people who have a family member who is a drug addict or alcoholic. When I share the story anonymously, they don't know that I'm related to Leonard Nimoy. They don't need to know. It really resonated with people. And oftentimes, if I would be leading a meeting, people would come up to me afterwards and say, I'm going to call my mother and my father, because I'm inspired that maybe it is possible to reconnect with them by using the tools of recovery. And I just felt like it was resonating with people and that I should just do the deep dive and really share my story in more detail, because it's a part of my recovery to be of service and to share my experience, strength, and hope.
In the book, you're very candid. And there's some very significant, close personal stories about your father, your mother, your ex-wife, your kids. So I guess my question is, did you have to get that pre-approved with them before you told some of these stories?
Well, yeah. There's a lot about my kids and my ex-wife in there and my sister. It's like you can't send them a PDF and expect them to read it and look for themselves in there and then give you notes, because they're just never going to look at it. I had to sit them all down and actually read the stuff to them. And, my sister was like, no, you can't put that in there. You have to take that out. Which was fine. And my son also had some editorial commentary. My ex-wife, interestingly enough, there's an episode in the book where we're separated and we have a little difference of opinion out in front of what used to be our home. I had moved out, and there were police in the neighborhood, just coincidentally, and they came over to see what all the yelling was about. And when they approached us, my wife gave one of the police officers some lip, and I put it in the book. And she said to me when she read it, excuse me, I said a lot more to that cop. And I want it in there. And I said, great. I pulled out my computer. I said, start dictating. I'll put it in there.
So they're all going to know that I like to ask, and I'm intrigued by how you come up with the title. So tell us how you came up with the title, The Most Human.
Well, The Most Human is a quote from Kirk's eulogy of Spock at the end of Star Trek II. I should just read it, right? It's kind of at the dedication of the book, because I don't want to butcher Nick Meyer's words by. Of my friend, I can only say this. Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human. Kirk's eulogy of Spock.
And so, was that what you knew you were going to call the book?
No, I mean, I had a bunch of different titles, and somebody at the publishing house was actually a Trekkie and said, "How about this?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's it. Thank you."
So I think we should start at the beginning, and I think to understand you and your father's problems and reconciliation, you need to talk about his upbringing and his parents. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, my father was born in 1931, and his parents were Ukrainian immigrants. They considered themselves Russian, but they were from Zaslav, which is between Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and Lviv on the western border. And they're, a large part of our story is of the Jewish people, which is they're part of the diaspora. They had to leave because of violence against Jews in their village, in their small town, pogroms they called them. My father's uncle, my grandfather's brother, who was an accomplished violinist, was killed during a pogrom. And they came, and the interesting thing is this whole thing about intergenerational trauma, because they had it. They came from a very small village in the middle of Ukraine, and they ended up in the West End of Boston. The West End is in downtown Boston. You can't get to the heart. They're right next to Beacon Hill. I mean, they're right in downtown Boston. And it was a culture shock for them, really, to try to figure out how to assimilate in this intense urban center. So my dad was born into that, and his whole upbringing, his objectives were really threefold. Number one, to generate money to help fill the family coffers. He was selling newspapers on the Boston Common in the dead of winter at age 10 years old. And after that, it was a number of odd jobs. Number two was to pursue his passion, which was acting. He was not a good student, unlike his older brother. And number three was to figure out a way to get the hell out of the West End, because it was a bubble. It was an immigrant neighborhood that was Irish, Italian, and Russian Jews. And he really wanted to figure out how to break out of that mold and assimilate himself into American society. And then he came to LA, and when he told his parents he wanted to be an actor, they were devastated. They wanted him to fulfill their idea of the American dream, which is to go to college and become a doctor or a lawyer, which I managed to do. But his older brother fulfilled that role by was a very excellent student, Uncle Mel. My dad had no interest in school. Mel went to Northeastern and to MIT and became a chemical engineer for Johnson & Johnson for 30 years. So he satisfied their desire, but they would not help my dad when he said he wanted to go to Hollywood and study acting and try to make his way in the business. So he came to LA with nothing at age 18, with nothing. And the hustle was on to support himself. And soon, that was in 1949, by 56, I came along. My sister was already there. He was supporting a family of 4. And the hustle was on big time. And this is a guy who was just trying to survive by generating income, pursuing his passion for acting. My mother was really basically a single parent holding down the fort. So this is the problem. I mean, my dad and I were doomed from the start, because when I was 10 years old, I was born in sunny Southern California. When I was 10, Star Trek went on the air, and finally we started to, there was some money in our family. We were a real hand-to-mouth family. But, when I was a kid, I was watching 60s TV, reading Amazing Spider-Man comics, and listening to the Fab Four. I was a kid. I was being a kid. My dad had no connection to that. He had no understanding of that. So right away, we were going to be in trouble.
So you describe him as a Renaissance man, even during that time period. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. My dad, Renaissance man, he could do anything. He could do anything. He could build anything. He was a carpenter. He was just, he was an electrician. He was a painter. He re-landscaped this house that we bought in West LA. He did all the brickwork. I mean, the guy was phenomenal. I mean, my dad could do anything. He was the thing I like to say is that I had to be very careful about the way I wrote the book, because I am talking very honestly about some of the conflict I had with him, and I'm dealing with a guy who played this iconic character and is loved and adored by millions of people all over the world. And they don't want to hear trash about Leonard Nimoy. And I had to be very careful about the way I wrote these episodes that we had, where they were really unpleasant. And the way I try to take the curse off is because I was always proud of him. I was always impressed by him. I was always inspired by him and what he had accomplished. Because my dad was an incredibly interesting, intelligent, interested person with so little formal education. He was just, and an artist in process, always trying to express himself in one way or another, whether it was through acting, writing, directing, photography, poetry. I mean, he had so many, he had a private pilot's license. He was amazing in a boat on the water. He learned how to sail on the Charles River when he was growing up in Boston. I mean, this guy could do anything. However, on the parenting front, he was challenged.
So tell us about your mom, though, because there's kind of a contrast between your dad and your mom. Tell us about Sandy.
Well, my mother was a very interesting person, a very colorful person, very colorful background. She was born in Cordova, Alaska, a small fishing village on the south coast of what was then the Alaskan Territory. Her parents came from Lithuania and Latvia. Her dad was looking for his fortune, and he made it to Alaska trying to make his way, and he found success there, weirdly enough, by opening up a dry cleaners in the middle of a fishing village. And he sold suits as well. I mean, I have dozens of pictures of my mother's family. She had a younger sister. They're dressed to the nines. They're wearing these beautiful dresses, my mom and her sister. And my grandfather's always dapper in a suit. And my grandmother's wearing minks and these beautiful dresses, and they're in the middle of nowhere. They look like they're going to take a stroll down Fifth Avenue. They're in the middle of nowhere. It's bizarre. So she grew up in Cordova, very happy, idyllic childhood. I mean, I was there twice, one, with my mother visiting, and it's just beautiful. You can't get there by road. You have to have a seaplane or a boat to get there. The best salmon hash, by the way, I've ever eaten. It's an amazing place. And then she came to L.A., I think, to finish high school. They ran out of teachers in Cordova, Alaska, and she met my dad backstage in a theater in Hollywood. My mother was also aspiring to do work as an actress. So they got married right away in 54. My sister came along at 55, and I came along at 56, and for the next 10 years, it was a challenge. It was a hand-to-mouth situation. I mean, my parents had nothing. They had no money. The interesting thing about my mother, which was confirmed by friends and family later on in my life, is that she never wavered in her support of my dad and his desire to pursue an acting career. She believed in him like he believed in himself, never wavered. And she held down the fort as a single parent, as I said. She was the loving, kind, sensitive, supportive person, touchy-feely type of person that my father was not. I mean, there's a lot of Leonard and Spock, and there's a lot of Spock and Leonard. And, not easy to live with. So when my dad made it when Spock came on the air and he was immediately popular, the show was successful immediately, my mother transitioned to what I like to call a 50s housewife into flower power priestess and wife of Mr. Spock. She was the groovy mom, the cool mom, the hip mom. She wore these great clothes. We had flowers in our, dead flowers, dried flowers, flower stickers, bright-colored furniture, Indian print. She wore this wig this fall. She had rose-colored glasses. She loved rock. She loved jazz. She was amazing. She was so inspirational. But when my father left my mother after 32 years of marriage and took with him the celebrity lifestyle they had enjoyed, she crashed. And for the next 25 years of her life, it was very challenging for my sister and I to take care of her. And that's, and Alana was very helpful to me as well in learning how to accept her and be of service to her.
So I want to talk a little about before Star Trek became so popular. So in those intervening years, 56 to 66, when your dad's a struggling actor, did you and Julie know he was an actor? I mean, did you understand what he was doing?
Yeah, because, I was watching 60s TV and he kept showing up. I'd just be watching something like Outer Limits, which I loved, and there was this episode about this robot who's being put on trial for accidentally killing his creator, and the reporter covering this story is Leonard Nimoy. I was like, what? That's Dad. The other thing that I talk about in there is I was watching on a Saturday afternoon. It was a B movie. It was a crummy horror film, but we only had 3 channels back then. And I was watching this movie. It was called Attack of the Brain Eaters, I think it was called. A schlocky, film. And I'm sitting there watching, and it turns out that the king of the Brain Eaters was my dad. He was disguised. He had makeup on, but the minute he spoke, it was like, oh my God, Mom, you've got to see this. It was just, So we knew. I mean, if you look at IMDb, he had been in dozens of roles before Star Trek came along, and we never knew when it was going to air. But I was really, I was proud of what he was doing, and we knew he was pursuing an acting career, but we also knew that he was servicing fish tanks, driving a cab, sold refrigerators, worked in a pet store, servicing these gumball machines, managing an apartment building. I mean, we knew all this. This is why he was never around.
So Spock, or Star Trek, comes out in September of 1966. And did you watch that first episode together as a family?
Yeah, as I talked about this in the book, we had to go to a friend's house in Beverly Hills because we did not have a color TV. And in fact, we didn't get a color TV. That was September. We didn't get one until December. We got these 2 portable color TVs because my dad had done some ad for RCA, and we got them for free. That's the way Leonard worked. Yeah, it was a big event. It was a big night for us. It was a big breakthrough for my dad. He'd never been a continuing character, even in a series before. He says in an interview in the Spock doc that before Star Trek, he never had a job that lasted longer than 2 weeks. And every night on Thursday night, we'd sit in my parents' bedroom and watch Star Trek on their portable black and white TV until those color TVs arrived in December.
So did you know then, right away, it was going to be as popular as it turned out to be?
No, we had no idea. I mean, people were talking about it. It became apparent very quickly. And shortly after it started airing, 16 there were all these fan magazines back, like that we have them now. And 16 magazine, which was extremely popular, we were all reading 16 magazine, published our home address as the mailing address for the fan mail. So, the mailman stopped coming. They just sent a truck every week with sacks of mail. That's when and the paparazzi, these guys started showing up at our house. We'd come home from school, and there'd be photographers there. And, we were an obscure family one week. And the next week, we were, I talk a lot about, I think maybe not in this book, but I had written about the fact that in 1965, my dad took my sister and I to see the Christmas parade on Hollywood Boulevard. All the stars, they sit in an open-air automobile and they drive down Hollywood Boulevard. And we got there late and we couldn't even see anything because it was so crowded. And we made a vow to each other that we would get there next year early and get a good seat. Well, the next year we were in the parade.
So you tell a great story about after the show had come out and it had been immensely popular, that you tried to go to a carnival, I think, at St. Timothy's Church. Tell us about that.
Yeah, St. Timothy's at Beverly Glen at Pico Boulevard. My dad and I, we tried to do these, he wanted to do these father-son things because he felt that was the proper role of a father to do, is take your son out and do something together. And it was always pretty awkward to be out with him. And then one time we tried this after Star Trek had gone on the air. And we went to St. Timothy's in West LA, not far from where we lived, and there was a carnival going on. And as soon as we got there, a couple of kids came up for autographs. And he signed off on them, and then they went away, and we thought that was it. That was not it. He was swarmed immediately. And finally, he turned to me and said, "We got to get out of here." And that was the end of that. It was, a relief to me because I did not enjoy being alone with him. It was so, never knew what to say. He never knew what to say. It was very awkward being with him. And then after that, we were out as a family. We used to go to the regular restaurants together and stuff. That was just not in the cards for us anymore.
So you made the statement that there was a little bit of Leonard and Spock and a little bit of Spock and Leonard. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, it's a part of what my dad would tell me when I was transitioning out of the law profession, with all due respect. And because I wanted to direct TV, I really wanted to do something more creative. And my dad said to me early on, right away, he said, here's the point. You've got to find some personal connection to the story you're telling or the character you're playing. You must find some personal involvement, something that grabs you on your own level. And because that way, the more specific you are in terms of the storytelling, the more universal it is, the more believable it is. And that's what happened with Spock. I mean, Spock is great because Spock is Leonard's story. Spock is Leonard's story. Spock is, he's on the bridge of the Enterprise, and it's a multi-ethnic, multi-racial cast. There's only one alien on that bridge, and that's Spock. And my dad's whole objective as a young man growing up as a teenager in Boston was to find a way to get the hell out of the West End, to integrate himself with American society and give the best that he had to offer as an artist. That's Spock. Spock's whole objective, in my dad's mind, was to find a way to integrate himself with his human counterparts and to give the best that he had to give to the crew. That's what made it personal. That's what made it real. The more specific you are in your art, the more it resonates with people in general. It's a weird combination, and this is something I learned very early on. And this is why people identified with Spock, because Spock was the outsider, the outcast, the one for us geeks, weirdos, nerds, and social misfits. Me, it resonated with us because it was it validated our feelings. So, the problem was that I had a dad who was very introverted, very, introspective, very reserved, very cool to begin with. And then he was always saying in interviews, well, I had trouble getting in and out of character. So not only do I have Leonard to live with, now I got Spock to live with. And it just, as a kid growing up in the formative years, it was just really difficult.
You have a great story in there about your father coming home, and he would come home late in the evenings, want to get prepared for the next day, and your mother would help him with his lines. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I can still hear it in my mind's eye because they did it every night. It's like it's in the hard drive. We all have that, memories and things that we can hear our parents. I still hear my dad, telling me stuff in my mind. And at night, every night, my dad would come home. He would eat his dinner. He would get into bed, and my mother would run lines with him. And she would be reading Kirk, McCoy, whoever, and it was so. And my dad he was not in character, but he was so tired, but he would just say the dialogue so that he was ready for the next day.
Did you ever visit the set?
Right here. This is it. First Trekkie, folks, right here. First cosplay, right here. This is July 1966. This is 6 weeks before this series even aired. And I was visiting the set that summer, and, they were always, the whole point was to try to get Leonard to break character and, laugh, right? So, and Bill Shatner was always doing stuff like stealing his bike. I mean, they had this whole thing about the race to the commissary to get to lunch. They're starving by the time, they called lunch at 1 o'clock, I think, because they started at, 7. The call time was at 7 a.m. So Bill would always hide the bike. See if Leonard could find his bike on, today, because you wanted to ride down there to the commissary as quickly as possible. You'd have to wait in line. Well, they were rehearsing this scene. Kirk is on the Planet of the Week, and Spock is sitting in the captain's chair. Next thing I know, the assistant director comes and grabs me and says, "Come on, we're going to the makeup trailer." And I sat in my dad's makeup chair, and Fred Phillips, who created Spock's makeup. He was a great, interesting guy, a real artiste. He sat me in the chair. He cut off my hair. He shaved my eyebrows, which never fully recovered, by the way. And then he did the eye pencil, and he glued on a pair of my dad's ears. You can see they don't quite fit. And then while they were shooting the scene, they had me in the turbo lift. I mean, it's one of those things, again, in the hard drive where I can still see myself standing in that turbo lift waiting for those doors to open. And then I came out and went over to my dad and gave him a kiss and said, "Hi, Daddy." And my dad was like, and everybody's laughing, on the crew behind the scenes. And Leonard's like, okay, yeah, you got me. And then we broke for lunch and had these pictures taken. It was... look, it was great. It was great being on the set with my dad, but I stayed the hell away from him because he was, it was like, don't bother me. Because he's in character and he's thinking about his dialogue. And I was, I was 10, so I knew enough to, let him stay in his Spock bag, we used to say. That was hip talk back in the 60s.
So I want to ask one more Trekkie question, and then we're going to talk some serious issues that went on with you and your dad. But tell us about how the Vulcan hand sign originated and whose idea it was.
Well, I mean, this, right? Live long and prosper. This came from, my dad got this idea from growing up in the West End of Boston with Orthodox Jewish parents. He was going to shul and during the high holy days, the holiest day of the Jewish year, the priests put on they take their talit and they stand up in front of the congregation, and with their hands like this, they bless the congregation. It's a priestly blessing. Well, it stands for the Hebrew letter shin. It forms the shin, and the shin stands for Shaddai, the Almighty, one of the many names we have for God. And when it came to this episode, Amok Time, and my dad was on the planet Vulcan and greeting the matriarch of the planet, he just felt like that he should do something other than, you don't shake hands, and instead of bowing or saluting, this is what he came up with, and the director was fine with it, and now everybody's doing it. It's great. It's a great, because it's like a gesture of goodwill, towards one another, and I think that's why it's resonated to this day.
So I didn't think about this until just now, but when you were out in public and someone finds out who you are, or you're at Comic-Con talking about your book or something about Star Trek, and they give that salute to you, how does that make you feel?
Well, I love it. It's like, look, I've been on this book tour since June, and I'm just basking in the afterglow of this goodwill that Leonard has created. It's not just live long and prosper. Which is wonderful. It's just that people are so affected, so impacted by the life of Leonard Nimoy and the character of Mr. Spock. And, my dad's been gone for 10 years now, but he's still very much on people's minds. And, it's a weird thing about trying to create my own identity as a writer, as a filmmaker, initially as an attorney, to try to find out who I am and be okay at the same time with reveling in this afterglow and meeting people. A lot of people at the conventions are just happy to shake my hands because they feel like they're touching some Leonard DNA, as kooky and crazy as it is, but if it gives people joy and a sense of good feeling and goodwill, I'm all for it. I'm particularly in the world we live in. This is a challenging planet Earth, for a lot of reasons. I'm happy to continue the legacy and be an ambassador of that goodwill.
It is pretty amazing what happened with that show and the legacy of it, because in preparing for this, I put in Spock's ears in Google. And of course, you can find and buy them all over the place, primarily on Amazon. But what I didn't know is that there's actually a disease of the ear that's called Spock's ear. I don't know if you knew that, but it's a part of the earlobe that actually...
As Johnny Carson would say, I did not know that.
Well, anyway, look it up. There is actually a disease of the ear. So, I think we forget that the original Star Trek was only on for 3 years, 66 to 69, and then it was canceled. I didn't remember this either, but your dad had the starring role in Mission Impossible for 2 years after Star Trek. So in 1971, your dad decides not to do a third season in Mission Impossible, and he doesn't get a job right away. You're now in your teenage years, and he's home. He's been gone for 5 or 6 years, almost every day and every weekend. So how did that impact you and your family?
Well, my dad was at home. He didn't really know what to do with himself, and he started to take an interest in me. I'm 17 by this time. I'm learning how to drink and use, and I'm a complete and total deadhead. I was chasing the Grateful Dead up and down the state of California, and he just didn't. He couldn't relate to that. Go figure. So there was some conflict that started to happen with him when I was, mouthing off a little bit and just pushing back against him, and we had a real bad knockdown drag out when I was 17, and he actually wrote me a letter, sort of apology. He felt bad the fact that he's home now and we're knocking heads with one another. It's sort of the job of a teenager, I think, to push the limits a little bit, but it was just, we didn't have any tools to really figure out how to deal with conflict or difference of opinion. And he wrote me this letter, and he said flat out and very clearly, he said, competing with me and arguing with me is going to be very difficult for you for basically 3 reasons. Number 1, I'm very loud and verbal. Number 2, I'm basically just a tough kid from the streets of Boston. Don't screw with me. And number 3, I'm rich and famous.
And you had some You didn't have physical fights, but you had some pretty toe-to-toe arguments. One was about the Beatles, of all things. Tell us about some of those, because they kind of help frame what this book, in a sense, is about.
You know, it's complicated. I'm trying to figure out the best way to present this. It's just that I just didn't measure up in a lot of ways for him. I just didn't. A lot of it had to do with the fact that he struggled to get to where he was. You know, he earned every dollar, that he earned. It's interesting that tomorrow I'm going to give the eulogy for Bernie Francis. Bernie Francis was my dad's business manager for almost 50 years. And, my dad would say the Star Trek money was great, but it was Bernie Francis who really brought home the bacon. Bernie invested all that money in California real estate in the 70s when it was still affordable. So, my dad was very much a self-made man. I was very different from that, and I was just a very different type of person. I was not, I had my own goals and my own desires and my own aspirations, but, competition wasn't something that really appealed to me, and, generating income was not something I was obsessed with because I didn't have to be. I just was not, and I used to say that to Bernie, my dad's business manager. I wish I had made more money, and he said, "Kid, you didn't need to. Just do what you're doing." But my dad had trouble with that. I mean, the measure of a man for him was how successful he was. And he was never, here's the problem, it's this intergenerational trauma, because his parents, despite my dad's phenomenal success, his parents never really gave him the approval that he wanted and needed. They were giddy with the attention that they were getting from the fans. I mean, my grandmother, who wore the pants in the family, would read us this fan mail they were getting. I mean, people were taking them out to dinner in Boston. I mean, it was kooky, and they loved it. But I never heard them say that they were proud or that they loved my dad. And I just think, he had a lot of trouble expressing that with me, and a lot of his own professional frustrations. Some of it came out on me. Guys of his generation were very good at expressing judgment, criticism, anger, displeasure, no problem. But when it came to love, support, understanding, patience, tolerance, very challenging.
So you go to Berkeley undergrad. Why did you go to law school? You went to Loyola.
Always wanted to go. Always. I thought I was going to be in politics when I was in high school, and I just, wanted to get a postgraduate degree. I didn't want to go to work. That's true. I wanted to stay in academia, and I thought it would be, mentally challenging. I knew I could do it. I wanted to do it, and I wanted to do something that Leonard could not do.
And did he approve of you going to law school?
Yeah, it was mixed. I mean, there's this episode of What Happens to Me with him at Berkeley. I mean, it's a mixed thing. He was proud of what I had done, and he was proud to be able to afford to send me, and at the same time, he was competitive and resentful.
So after law school, you become an entertainment lawyer. You do that for 7 years. Why did you decide to change professions?
It just wasn't for me. There was nothing creative in it. I just wasn't born to do it, be transactional, be on the phone all day, pushing paperwork around. I mean, these contracts were huge, and it was like, who cares? I just didn't care. And then when I was in between, and like in L.A., there were so many freaking lawyers in the state of California, and in L.A., they all want to be entertainment lawyers, and it's just hard finding good jobs. And it's like, what's the point of this? And when I was in between legal jobs, I went to Jeff Corey's acting class. Now, Jeff was teaching acting in the late 50s because he was blacklisted, and my dad was in his class. And when I met up with Jeff, he was semi-retired and teaching class, and he invited me to come out there while I was unemployed. And I went out there one morning, and holy shit, it was amazing. And I stayed with him for 2 years, learning the craft of acting, not because I wanted to get in front of a camera. One actor in the family was more than enough. I wanted to learn something about being an actor's director, and I did with Jeff and the help of my father. And it just turned me on, about storytelling. It's just, my dad was a big part of the inspiration for that, too, I've got to say. He was giving a keynote address at BU in 2012, and he begged them, we want your stories. We want to know what your experience is. Tell us something about what the human experience is all about. Camila, this is what it's all about. It's just, she's the future voice of that. This is what it's all about, because her experience that she's shedding in her story sheds light on our experience. It gives meaning. It gives dimension to our lives. And that's what storytelling was that I learned in Jeff's class, and that's what I learned from my dad to prepare me to go into the directing business.
So you go to law school, you work 7 years in entertainment law, you become a director and a successful director. You get married, you have 2 kids, Jonah and Maddie. Are you an addict during this entire time?
Yeah, I mean, I was just smoking pot to cope and to self-medicate, much like Leonard used alcohol.
So there's a great line you're told, and I've forgotten now who told you this, but the quote is, they don't complain, this person's talking to you.
Yeah, my agent.
They don't complain about the work, just your attitude. How did that impact you?
Well, I mean, my agent was famous for calling me up and saying, shut the hell up and do the work. Because I could be very irritable and restless and discontent, as we say in recovery, because I wasn't getting high when I was working on these TV shows, because I wanted to be sober and not make any mistakes. I'm in withdrawal. Hello? I mean, it takes 90 days to get THC out of your system, and I'm just, irritable all the time. So when I get there at 6:30 in the morning and a producer or somebody wants to screw with me, I'm gonna give it right back to them. Well, we don't do that in TV land as a director. You don't do that because you don't get asked back. And I shot myself in the foot repeatedly. And I had a very good agent. They got me a lot of work, and I was doing a lot of good work. I was. But, there's a lot of bullshit in the industry. Have you guys ever heard that? There's a lot of it. I mean, a lot of people fail upwards in the entertainment industry. That's what my dad used to say. It's not, my dad would say, it's not a brotherhood. It's not, it's not a loving profession. My dad said to me right out, he said, when you're in trouble on the set, and, don't look to a producer to give you any help. They're not going to give you a life raft. They're going to throw you an anchor. They love to see you fail. So, and I did. I mean, because of my addiction problem, my career waned very quickly, and it was over after about 9 or 10 seasons.
So tell us about the first AA meeting you went to. You actually went with your dad, who'd been an alcoholic and now was sober, on his second meeting. But tell us about that AA meeting you went to.
Well, it infuriated me because I heard the 12 steps for the first time, and when they got to step 9, became willing to make amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I was just freaking angry at my father, who was sitting next to me, because he had never made an amends to me.
So when did you realize you had a problem?
Well, I knew that. I mean, I realized that because my kids, I was in a marriage that wasn't really doing well, and I was just kind of smoking my way through it, and my career was ending in Hollywood, and, I was just trying to survive my marriage, really. I mean, I just didn't want to do anything about it because I had these 2 little kids, and they were so freaking cute. Maddie and Jonah, I just didn't want to leave. But it got to a point where they were old enough, when they were 12 and 14, to know that there was something wrong with me. And that's when I thought, okay, I think it's up. My time has come. And I went sober on January 1st, 2004, and 2 weeks later I moved out of my house and started, I was separated from my wife, Nancy, who I'm very close to now, my ex-wife. I mean, she's feeding my cats at this very moment in my house in LA. And, when I started on the road to recovery, that was the beginning of it.
Can you tell us about your road to recovery? Kind of how you made that transition?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just started going to AA meetings. I was never in rehab, really. I just started, I was going to AA, I was going to Al-Anon, and this is where the change happened with my dad. This is the kind of the critical moment, was that, I was detaching with love from my father. Our relationship was too toxic. And one of the ways that, this is one of the mantras of Al-Anon that deal with that, is just to kind of back away and set boundaries, and I did. The love part was I always showed up for him, whether it was photography exhibit or screenings or premieres, or we were at the Griffith Park Observatory opening of the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater. I mean, I went to all these things for him, and I was not always welcome by him because he was angry with me, in large part because I had pulled away from him. For him, having negative engagement was better than being estranged from me. And it wore on him very heavily, to the point where, he sent me a long letter, a 6-page letter, and in that letter, he basically outlined all the reasons why he thought I was the reason for the dysfunction in our relationship and why I was a complete and total fuck-up.
And how?
Excuse me for saying that.
What? So when you got that letter, how did you react?
Well, it was devastating to me, and then
you're in recovery now, right?
Yeah, I'm in recovery. It's devastating, but my next, look, I'm an addict in recovery. You have to understand, when people piss me off, like they cut me off on the 405, I don't do this. I do this. The fact is, we have mantras in recovery because I'm responsible for my second thought and the first action that follows from that thought. I heard that from a woman in AA during COVID when I was on a Zoom meeting. I'm responsible for my second thought and the first action that flows from that thought. My first thought, she said, when people piss me off, is always F you. To get to that thought, we have a lot of sayings in recovery, like count to 10, count to 20, restrain a pen and tongue, let go and let God, contrary action, and my all-time favorite, don't just do something, sit there. Because it's an attempt to get a grip on our brain and calm down before our mouth starts moving and our fingers start typing. And my dad was throwing down the gauntlet by sending me that letter. By the way, 90% of that letter was correct. He was right about me. You know why? I'm as human as he is, and I made a lot of mistakes. So I shared about the fact that I didn't react to it, and I let him let it go, let him get it off his chest, and I prayed that we would have a good relationship someday. And all my brothers and sisters were supportive of me. I shared this anonymously in recovery, and they were all saying, "This is, practicing these principles in all your affairs. That's step 12. You're living a life in recovery." But my friend Chris Kelton, who had 10 years more recovery than I did. Chris, who was a friend of mine in high school and taught me everything I needed to know about drinking and using.
And who your dad didn't like.
Chris, whom my dad loathed. Chris said, not good enough. This is great. You need to take this letter, go to your dad, and make an amends. Steps 8 and 9.
And did you do that?
Well, first I was like, are you freaking out of your mind? There's no way I'm going to do that. Why would I do that? Complete capitulation to him. I'm not going to give him an amends. He never made one to me. And that's when Chris said the amends is not for him. It's for you. It's for you. Because my inclination, my dad used to say, I've got your number. That's what he used to say to me. And that was the 6-page letter. And my response after I calmed down reading it was, Leonard, I've got your number. I got 10 pages of material. Wait for it. It's coming. But I didn't do it because I'm in recovery. And I had my own resentments against my dad. And Chris was very clear. He said, you got a choice. You can be right about your father and all the stuff that he pulled on you through the years. You're right. You're right about it. You can be, that's okay. Or you can be happy. But if you want to be happy, you need to make an amends to him for everything in that letter and let go of your own resentment towards your dad and get on with your life.
And did it work?
Yeah, my dad really enjoyed the experience. When I was making the amends to him in his big house in Bel Air, I went up there and I was like, I wasn't feeling it. We fake it till we make it, we say in AA. I mean, we had all these saying. When I got into AA and I said, what is this nonsense? Count to 10, count to 20, let go and let God and all this stuff. It doesn't make any sense. Fake it till you make it. What does that mean? Well, it meant that take the direction and do what Chris told me to do, and the feeling will come along for the ride sooner or later, or you pray it comes along for the ride. So I wasn't really feeling it, but I did do it. And my dad enjoyed the experience so much so that when he was seeing me out the door after it was all over, he invited me to Shabbat dinner the following Friday night. And after that, everything changed.
So I would imagine this is hard for you to talk about. It almost makes me cry, but tell us about Martha.
So what happened was, things started to get better with my dad, but and I had been divorced, and then I met the Shiksagadis, at a doctor's office, and she was lovely. We were married in January of 2011, and in May of that year, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she was very sick for 18 months, very difficult, challenging time. And my dad was just my go-to guy. You know, by then, his priority was family. Everything had turned around for him. He was semi-retired, and he cared, and he was interested, and he was there for me. And I could call him up at any moment to tell him all the stuff that was going down with Martha, and he just kept showing up for me. He was bringing me food. I mean, I was taking care of her, you know? I mean, you know, it's really rough on the caregiver who have to take care of people who are dying from cancer. And he would show up every Friday with a huge care package of food for the week for me. And he was taking me to Shabbat services, you know, on Friday nights to give me a break. I mean, he was really there for me. And yeah, I mean, just everything had turned around.
So just a couple of questions. You're going to need your glasses because I'd like you to read something.
Thank you.
It's an interactive.
At least I'm not sitting on them.
So if you could read these two paragraphs here, and maybe if I could just set it up. You've been to the doctor's talked to both of you and kind of told you what's going on. Turns out he's a friend of yours, and after you leave and you're alone, you call him on the phone. And here's what.
And you want me to read the part
Yes.
with the doctor's phone conversation as well? Yeah, okay.
There to there.
Yee, okay. So I'm on the phone with the doctor, and I know this guy because he happened to be a soccer dad. I didn't realize that when we went there. This is the guy who diagnosed Martha. I was like, I couldn't, you know, Michael Reed. It sounds familiar. Michael Reed. Is that Mike Reed? Brilliant, you know, deductions, Spock-like logical deduction. It was Mike Reed. So he calls me back. Hi, Mike. Thank you for taking my call. I'm alone now. I want to know what the prognosis is for Martha. Well, we have to see how she responds to treatment. No, Mike, you said that before, and we heard the same thing from the oncologist and the radiologist. I want to know what you really think. He hesitated. I was in the parking lot at Precision Motors, which was basically a one-door garage in a warehouse complex where Andy, my mechanic, and his partner worked exclusively on European cars. I was lucky to find Andy, who happened to live in my apartment building off Venice Boulevard. I'd sit in my car in the parking garage decompressing, and he'd be at the other end of the garage working on his car. One day I walked over and introduced myself. There were plenty of Alphas and Mercedes and BMWs lined up for repair at Precision Motors. Sometimes they worked on old classic Ferraris and Maseratis in mint condition. Sometimes they let me sit in the driver's seat of those cars, and I would imagine myself driving the Amalfi Coast with the top down and Martha smiling next to me. She loved cars. Mike Reed let out a sigh. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I don't think she's going to make it. Her tumor is too big and her lymph nodes are involved, so it's spreading. You need to talk to the surgeon to get his opinion, but I think she's dealing with issues that are just too far along.
So just one last question and one last read. But maybe you can quickly tell us what you did after you hung up from the doctor.
After I hung up from the doctor, the first call I made was to my father.
And just an ending, if you can read from here.
Sure.
To the next page
Yeah.
there. Thank you.
And slowly but surely, my dad and I began to rebuild our relationship, so much so that 3 years later, in 2011, when I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, having just gotten the news, the first call I made was to my father. Dad, we're screwed. She's not going to make it, I said. How do you know? He asked. I just talked to the doctor. Oh, Adam, I'm so sorry, he said. Does Martha know? No, and she doesn't want to. She thinks she can beat this. But the doctor's now saying the cancer has spread too far. Where are you? He said. I'll come to you. No, that's okay, I said. I just needed to tell someone, and that someone was you. That conversation was unthinkable just a few years before. Unthinkable.
Thank you, thank you. The book is fabulous.
Can I just say in conclusion, sure, that the thing is about my dad, and you know, I started studying Torah with the rabbi at Beit T'Shuvah Residential Addiction Treatment Center that my dad introduced me to, and I'm a board member there, and I've been with them for years. I studied Torah with the rabbi, and he explained to me that what my dad was doing for me was what we call living amends. That my dad was not the kind of guy who could say, I'm sorry. He wasn't built that way. He doesn't start thinking about who do I need to make an amends to today. He's just not a part of his vocabulary. But the fact that he showed up for me when I needed him and was the father that I needed him to be, living amends. The rabbi explained this to me. I should see it for what it was and be grateful. And it was more than enough for me. It was more than enough. People often ask me, you ever feel bad about the fact that he never said I'm sorry for the stuff that happened while he was drunk? And the answer is no. This was more than I could have asked for.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very supportive of Beit T'Shuvah. Oh, thank you. Hope to see you again for lunch. I hope so. Thank you. That was invested in